Emma, thank you. And many thanks to all of you at home who've been sharing your stories too.
Yeah, like this one from Tracy Ebril. She says, "This is my granddad with the Queen in the 1960s when she visited Chester Racecourse. He was forever proud to have worked so closely with Her Majesty."
Yeah, this one's from Sarah Doherty. She says this is her husband, Phil. It was taken in Liverpool, probably in the late 1980s. Phil looked like he was on his very best behaviour that day,
Yeah,
Gamal.
something tells me that he was on his very
he
best
was.
behaviour. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Bye.
The late Queen lies at rest tonight in Edinburgh as Scotland gathers to say its final farewell. Her coffin was carried into St Giles Cathedral following a journey down the city's Royal Mile. The Queen was escorted by her 4 children, King Charles leading his siblings in a sombre procession. Thousands lined the route to watch the cortege go past and with a chance to pay their respects inside the cathedral. For a special service celebrating the life of Queen Elizabeth II, and where her son listened to the national anthem. We're live in the city tonight as the Queen's closest family prepare to hold a vigil around her coffin and in her honour. We'll also be looking at the Crown's special relationship with Scotland, from the days spent together in their beloved Balmoral and at Bramer's Highland Games. And hundreds of miles away in London, attention turns to the Queen's return to the capital, where she will lie in state later this week.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale in Edinburgh.
Good evening from Holyrood House in Edinburgh, where the Queen's coffin was mooned this afternoon in a sombre procession led by the King and her children. Tens of thousands of people lined the historic Royal Mile as the Queen's coffin was taken to St Giles Cathedral. There, a special service of prayer and reflection was held, attended by senior royals and politicians. It celebrated the Queen's love and deep links with Scotland. Her Majesty's coffin, adorned with the centuries-old crown of Scotland, is tonight lying in rest at the heart of the cathedral. Members of the public have been allowed inside to pay their respects. A little later tonight, the King, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex will hold a vigil by her side. Right now, King Charles and the Queen Consort are in the Scottish Parliament, where MSPs have been offering their condolences. Any minute now, the royals are about to leave for the short journey to the Palace of Holyrood. And this is the Royal Mile, where thousands of people lined the streets earlier. James Mates reports now on the day's events so far.
For a final time, through the Doric columns that flank the entrance to her official residence in Scotland for 70 years, the coffin of Her late Majesty leaves the Palace of Holyrood House. Bearers from the Royal Regiment of Scotland, watched by the King, who with his brothers and sister will accompany their mother on the short journey through Edinburgh to St Giles Cathedral. The silence broken only by the crisp military step of those who marched with their former sovereign. Behind the coffin, the Queen's 4 children. Alongside it, the Royal Regiment of Scotland and a Guard of Honour from the Royal Company of Archers, who serve as the sovereign's bodyguard in Scotland. The Royal Mile, running through the old town of Edinburgh, can rarely have been so silent, nor so full. The Queen spoke often of what she called her deep and abiding affection for this wonderful country. That she died here gave the people of Scotland this chance for a last formal farewell. Had she died in England, her body would not have been brought north. And they took that chance in huge numbers.
God bless the Queen!
Everyone who secured a vantage point determined to record the moment for those who couldn't get here, or for children or grandchildren to see this moment of history. Bathed in autumnal sunshine, the procession turned towards the west door of St Giles Cathedral, the High Kirk of Edinburgh. The King, in Field Marshal's uniform, carrying the baton presented to him by his mother 10 years ago. On top of the coffin, a wreath of white roses, freesias, chrysanthemums and heather from the Balmoral estate. As Queen of Scotland, there was one more important ceremonial function to perform. The crown of Scotland, the ancient crown of Scottish monarchs before the Act of Union, was placed on her coffin.
Here at St Giles, John Knox confronted Mary, Queen of Scots. Here Oliver Cromwell preached. Here our late Queen received the honours of Scotland, and the stone of destiny rested on its return to Scotland. We are graced by the presence of the King and members of the royal family.
A service of reflection and thanksgiving. Thanksgiving by Scotland's leaders for their monarch.
For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die.
As the service drew to a close, 4 members of the Royal Company of Archers took their positions at the 4 corners of the coffin. This vigil will be kept all night as the coffin lies at rest in the cathedral. Later this evening, it will be the Queen's 4 children who take their 20-minute turn to stand guard. Before the King flew to Scotland this morning, both Houses of Parliament had gathered in Westminster Hall to present their addresses of condolence and loyalty to the new monarch. Much of the ceremony and procedure that's followed the death of the Queen is ancient, albeit unseen for 7 decades. This one is new. In the past, such addresses would have been presented in private.
Members of both Houses of Parliament gather here to express our deep sympathy for the loss we have all sustained in the death of our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth. We have seen that this is a loss that is felt around the world. Deep as our grief is, we know yours is deeper.
In the very hall where an earlier Parliament had put an earlier King Charles on trial for his life, the King spoke of the inextricable link between Crown and Parliament in a constitutional monarchy.
Parliament is the living and breathing instrument of our democracy. That your traditions are ancient, we see in the construction of this great hall. While very young, Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
In this very hall on Wednesday, the Queen's coffin will be brought to lie in state for the 4 days leading up to her funeral. It will be a chance for hundreds of thousands to file past and pay their respects. In Edinburgh this evening, that has already begun. The coffin lying at rest in St Giles Cathedral before being flown to London tomorrow, less formal than the official lying in state in the city of her official home, but a chance many tens of thousands will take to say their own silent, very personal farewell. James Mates, ITV News.
And our Royal Editor Chris Shipp has been watching today's events with me here, and it has been a remarkable day, hasn't it? Your thoughts?
You know, Mary, I've just taken a short stroll up the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral, looking stunning, I have to say, in the evening sunlight, and there's no room to move up there. It's cheek by jowl, and that's not the people in the queue. Those are just the people watching the outside of this building, because they know something significant happened today. They know that history was made on those narrow cobbled streets known as the Royal Mile. And I'm kind of strikes me once again that all of this is happening here because the Queen died in Scotland. It wouldn't have happened had she died elsewhere. And I think it's rather fitting that Edinburgh is providing this stunning backdrop to the events of today, and that the people of Edinburgh and Scotland, and who knows where they're going to come from to file past this coffin, that they get to do this here as well as the lying in state in London. And we should also, say once again that the Queen has now left the Palace of Holyrood House for the last time. That's the official seat of monarchy in Scotland, but she won't return there now because after tomorrow the coffin will be moved by air to London.
What has been so spectacular is to watch the pageantry and the ceremony, all of it meticulously planned, all of it beautifully carried out so far. You can plan these things as much as you like. You can't plan for the weather, but even that has been immaculate, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, and there's a kind of quiet still around St Giles's Cathedral at the moment, and inside, of course, the vigils are now underway. They will keep watch over this coffin throughout the night. The Queen's bodyguard in Scotland, now of course the King's bodyguard in Scotland, is keeping watch on that coffin throughout. And we should point out that this evening there is that significant moment, and here the people starting to file into St Giles's Cathedral, and there you can see the Royal Company of Archers in all four corners of the coffin moments ago. And tonight the King himself, as well as his sister and two brothers, will be carrying out one of those vigils as people continue to file past the Queen's coffin on either side.
Now, you and I remember when that happened with the Queen Mother's coffin in Westminster Hall, and her grandchildren, the male grandchildren, carried out their own vigil there. It was immensely moving, and it will be an extraordinary sight, I think, tonight, won't it?
It will be, and it doesn't surprise me that the queue to file past the coffin for the what's called lying at rest is so long. Right now it travels from Lawn Market, which is one of the streets that make up the Royal Mile, and if people know their geography of Edinburgh, it goes all the way back to a park called the Meadows. That's about a mile at the moment, and there are a lot of people. It's quite a wide queue of people. Therefore, that means those people will be doing it into the evening, into the night, and all day tomorrow until at 5 o'clock the doors will be closed and the Queen's coffin will make its next move. This one will be to London.
Okay. For the moment, Chris, thank you very much. And tens of thousands of people, as Chris was saying, lined the route of the Queen's coffin procession today, all of them wanting to pay their respects. There was silence as the Queen's cortege passed by, and there was applause too for the King as he left the Thanksgiving service at St Giles Cathedral. Emma Murphy heard from some of those who were determined to take part.
On Edinburgh's ancient streets, another moment of history. A city paused in respect and reflection. Some remembered the accession and wished to honour a lifetime of service.
Jean, what was it that brought you here?
It was to
because the Queen's always been a part of her life and her family life and such like, and she was just such a wonderful lady and very regal and you name it.
Their loss is not one of their own, but many feel they were one of hers. And so they waited through darkness into day in the hope of a few seconds by the Queen's coffin.
I was 1 or 2 when she acceded to the throne, and she's always been a constant. She's the Queen, and I just feel I wanted to pay my respects. Simple as that.
Of course, Her Majesty was the boss of all bosses. She was my boss at one time. So I wouldn't miss it for the world.
We've lost... We've lost a most wonderful lady who she was just so kind to everybody, and we're really going to miss her. She's going to be sorely missed.
However great the challenge, the wish to acknowledge the role of the late Queen in life and in death guided many.
These are what are really important to me.
And the crown.
Yeah, they've got
Elizabeth.
Absolutely, yeah, that's who I was serving.
Jo Williams was a prison officer until ill health meant she could no longer serve. She travelled from Manchester.
The reason I decided to come is that for 15 years I've worn a crown on my shoulder because I was a prison officer, and it just meant a lot to me to come and pay my respects to the person that I felt I wore the crown for. I think she worked hard for the country, and I think the least we can do is to travel and to see her laid at rest.
Amy Calvert broke off a holiday to be at St Giles Cathedral.
How do you feel about having the opportunity to actually go and pay your respects as the Queen lies in rest?
Extremely privileged and exceptionally emotional. We saw her pass by yesterday, and it was the most surreal and emotional experience. Sharing a faith with her, it's been a real time of prayer and reflection. Really important to us.
As one era ends, this was a moment marked by all generations.
I think we just want to say thank you for her service and for everything she's done for us, really.
Tell me why you want to come and pay your respects to the Queen.
Because that she's been our monarch for over 70 years and she's one of the longest living.
Is it a really special day for you?
Yeah.
For those who lined these streets, it's a day they felt they had to be a part of. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Edinburgh.
And we are outside the Scottish Parliament here, and you can see the new King, King Charles, is meeting young people inside the Parliament right now, and Scottish editor Peter Smith is with me. There's significance of this, Peter.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this is obviously the first visit of our new King to the Scottish Parliament. He's visited Westminster already, and there has been a concern that in Scotland of a growing divide between the elderly population who have this affinity for the monarchy, and particularly the Queen, and how that would translate to the new monarch. So he's reaching out, engaging with the young people, and I think that it's really significant because he's spoken about his mother's deep affection for this country today. He's spoken about Robert Burns, paraphrasing Robert Burns, demonstrating that he understands the Scottish psyche, much like his mother did. Robert Burns, of course, was voted Scotland's greatest ever Scot just 13 years ago. So I think our new King is making great efforts to show that he is as much part of the fabric of Scottish society as his mother was.
Because we live in quite changeable times politically, don't we, in Scotland? There is a great deal that could change.
Absolutely. We cannot ignore that this is happening against the backdrop of the constitutional question that has been hanging over Scotland for over a decade. I think it is important to acknowledge that the policy of the SNP is that even if Scotland were to become independent, that Scotland would maintain a monarchy. That's not to say that that will never change. Polling suggests that Scots are overwhelmingly in favour of the monarchy. It will be interesting again to see how that translates to our new King. It's also important to remember that the Act of Union 1707 is actually comes after the Union of the Crowns. So if Scotland were to secede from the United Kingdom, it wouldn't automatically eradicate the role of the monarchy here. Scotland would maintain having a king, and King Charles's role here in Scotland as King of Scotland as well as King of England.
There's a lot of history, isn't there, at play here? I mean, it's fascinating stuff, Chris Shipp.
I remember very well covering the 2014 independence referendum when one of the questions was what money would Scotland have? The answer was the pound. And who would Scotland's head of state be? The answer at the time was still the Queen. So I think Peter's right to say that there is this question. No one, I think, wants to address it at the moment, clearly, because this is a period of mourning. But I think, as I said earlier, I think the very fact that all these events are happening, and that, to be clear, the King was always going to come here to address the Scottish Parliament. What is significant and the big change is that fact that the Queen is lying at rest in St Giles Cathedral, and here people can pay their respects. Just like as we saw yesterday with that coffin moving from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and we saw people instinctively and spontaneously coming out to pay their respects. All of that is only in the plan and only happening because the Queen passed at Balmoral.
And one can't help but think it's the most magnificent advertisement for Scotland, Peter.
That's really interesting, because the people who had that affinity, that affection for the monarchy up in Braemar, in Ballater, around the Balmoral estate, who knew the royal family, like we said, not mourning a monarch, but mourning their neighbour, remembering their neighbour, they were telling me that there was a great deal of pride in the role of the monarchy in their part of Scotland, but that the fact that the world's eyes on this event had got to see their homeland, a part of Scotland, a part of the UK that they're deeply proud of, and that they know the Queen was deeply proud of. So there was almost a wink at each other that, of course, we don't choose the time or place of her passing, but they knew how much that part of the country meant to Her Majesty, and that they were very, very pleased that the majesty of their homeland was on display for the whole world to see.
And I think we can all agree, Mary, Scotland has been looking absolutely beautiful in the last couple of days. And interesting,
yes.
What you can't see outside the Scottish Parliament building at the moment is that the other flags, the flag of Scotland, the Union flag, and also the European Union flag, is all flying at half-mast. The one flag that is flying at full-mast, of course, is the King's Royal Standard in Scotland, because the King's Royal Standard never flies at half-mast. And that's the situation outside the Scottish Parliament building behind us, and you're watching pictures right now of the King about to leave the building, and we wonder whether or not he'll try and do another impromptu walkabout while he's outside. Who knows?
He did a walkabout with Queen Consort a little bit earlier in the flower garden just outside the gates of Holyrood, didn't he? And there is every hope that he might emerge again today.
It's entirely possible, like he surprised us the other day when he decided to do that with the Queen Consort outside Buckingham Palace before he drove into Buckingham Palace for the first time. So therefore entirely possible that when he leaves the Scottish Parliament building imminently, there will be another walkabout at the bottom of the Royal Mile.
I think we can hear some words that the new King spoke a little bit earlier today.
Through all the years of her reign, the Queen, like so many generations of our family before her, found in the hills of this land and in the hearts of its people a haven and a home. My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
And Peter Smith, our Scotland editor. What's your thoughts on what the new King said there?
Well, I think it is really interesting that he is drawing on his mother's connection with Scotland. And I have to be honest, I mean, I've seen the coverage across the country, and I think that it's self-evident that there is a distinct and unique connection that this nation has with the monarchy, had with the Queen, and King Charles clearly reaching out to try and maintain that connection, that unique and distinct connection. And he's citing about his mother's deep affection for the country, how it was close to her heart. As I alluded to earlier, very savvy of him to draw in Robert Burns. Every single Scot knows exactly what Robert Burns means to this country, and the fact that our new King is demonstrating his knowledge of the poetry of the Scots bard. It's like someone being able to recite William Shakespeare or Wordsworth in England. He has a deep his connection to Scottish society runs deep. And so I think that this speech from the new king, the first time he has addressed the Scottish Parliament, is demonstrating his awareness as well of the different parts of the UK, a very different United Kingdom that his mother inherited when she was crowned monarch. He is stepping into a role of a country that there is some strain at the seams of the United Kingdom, and he is showing that he is ready to be the bond again, to maintain that bond and take on that weight of responsibility to maintain the bond that his mother treasured so deeply.
Chris, what else is coming up this evening? Give us an idea of what we actually have to look forward to.
I was just thinking, Mary, it doesn't look like the King is any great rush to leave the foyer of the Scottish Parliament, but he has a very significant moment coming up in the next half hour when he is due to walk up, perhaps drive up the Royal Mile back into St Giles Cathedral, where he was this afternoon, where he will keep watch over his mother's coffin along with his sister, the Princess Royal, and two brothers, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex and Forfar, as Edward is when in Scotland. That is due in the next half hour. So as much as the King might be wanting to press the flesh in the foyer of the Scottish Parliament building, which is at the bottom of the Royal Mile, just opposite the Palace of Holyrood House, a short distance from where we're standing now, he does have that rather important moment coming up, because at the moment the King's bodyguard for Scotland, the Royal Company of Archers, are still maintaining that vigil in 20-minute watches.
I think something else that was interesting is that the King, in his speech to the Scottish Parliament today, has confirmed that his son, Prince William, Prince of Wales, heir to the throne now, has taken on his titles in Scotland. Prince William will now be the Duke of Rothesay and will inherit the rest of his titles. That's a significant moment as well for Prince William to take on those additional roles, and something that also connects the people of Scotland to these events. I think that it's been, as we've seen in the last few days, you say, the scenery of Scotland on display, but also people in Scotland feeling very much part of this, and the titles are part and parcel of all of that.
For the moment, Peter and Chris, thank you. Let's go straight over now to Louise Scott, who is outside St Giles Cathedral now. And Louise, all four of the Queen's children are expected, aren't they, to hold a vigil there very soon?
They are, and there's crowds forming again around at St Giles Cathedral, waiting to hopefully get another glimpse of King Charles III. Obviously, people saw him here earlier as he attended that 3 o'clock service, and there was a calmness and a stillness as the Queen's coffin was taken in and the King alongside his siblings walked in. But after the service, when the King came out, there were some cheers of God Save the King, some people cheering as he went past, waving at those come out to stand. So again, we're having crowds waiting for that moment. We're expecting it just after 7 o'clock, and that will be really a private, reflective moment for the King and his siblings to be by their mother's coffin as it lies at rest inside St Giles Cathedral. And I'm sure you can also see over my shoulder that there are people trickling into St Giles Cathedral at the moment, and that's to pay their own respects. Many have been queuing since the early hours of this morning, and it's a good 15-20 minutes away that they started this. All ages, people turning out for this in all abilities. We've seen people with walking sticks, on wheelchairs, but that's how important it is for them. Not just people from Scotland, there's people travelled from northern parts of England, because this they see as their chance to be able to pay their respects to the Queen. But yes, we are expecting King Charles in the next 20 minutes or so to come back up the Royal Mile here, and I'm sure the people waiting to see him will be very much looking forward for that moment.
OK, Louise Scott, for the moment, thank you. And let's go straight over to Vigil, who's with the crowds in the meadows in the heart of Edinburgh.
Well, Mary, hundreds of people have begun waiting patiently in line for their chance to file past the Queen's coffin. And this is really only just the start of the queue. It stretches as far back as the eye can see into the meadows, past here and along, and it's growing continuously. It is more than 1.5 miles long, and it snakes its way through the centre of Edinburgh. The doors of St Giles will be open throughout the night and into tomorrow afternoon, so many of these people face long hours of waiting, and there are tight restrictions as to what people can take inside the cathedral, so anyone who brought umbrellas or flowers or camping equipment have had to leave those behind. Once they reach the cathedral, they will only have a precious few seconds to pay their respects before they will be asked to move on. And one police officer told us that he was expecting more than 4,000 people an hour to file past the Queen's coffin.
Sergio, thank you. Sergio Curry there in the meadows, waiting with people who are hoping to get into St Giles Cathedral to witness the lying at rest of the Queen there. Our reporter Neil Connery was amongst the crowd, and we will talk to him in just a moment. But right now, we are expecting the new King to walk out through the doors of the Scottish Parliament, and our cameras are focusing on that, and he is going to come out in just one moment. Now, Chris, do we have any idea what the King is going to be doing?
I have an idea because we know what he used to do when he was the Prince of Wales, and that is, I think he will be instinctively drawn to the crowds who will be waiting outside. As I mentioned a short while ago, Mary, he hasn't got that long in order to do it, although to be fair, and I think we were noticing this earlier, weren't we, that there were some delays in the programme earlier today. It didn't run as close to schedule as these things normally do, but I suspect the King will want to see some of the people outside. So there we go, that's his equerry. He's just come out, he's from the Royal Regiment of Scotland. It was an individual who was with the King in his previous role as Prince of Wales, which ordinarily means if he's come outside, the King will be following imminently. And I was struck by those cues that we were just seeing, Mary, with Sergio, and it's a reminder, if we look ahead to what's happening in London later this week with the lying in state at Westminster Hall, if the queues are this big in Edinburgh and it's a 24-hour period, what are they going to be like in London when the Queen is lying in state for 4.5 days?
Well, indeed, Chris. So, and talking of the crowds, let's go to Neil Connery, who is amongst the thousands who are queuing to pay their respects to the late Queen. And he's been inside St Giles, where her coffin is lying at rest, as we said. Neil, what is the atmosphere like now? I don't think Neil Connery can hear us. Well, never mind, we'll return to him a little bit later on. But to return to you, Chris, as we await the emergence of the King from the Scottish Parliament. Inside there, for anyone just joining us, he's been talking to young people, hasn't he, and really establishing that link that he feels so strongly about.
Yes, this is part of the four-nation tour, if you can call it a tour, that the King was always going to do following the death of his mother. Now, clearly the death happened in Scotland, which we reported from Balmoral, but the visit here to the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh was always part of the plan. Earlier today he went to Westminster Hall to meet MPs and Lords in the UK Parliament, and he's also due in the coming days to go to Belfast and to Cardiff as well. That was always part of the plan, and but I think the significance of today is the crowds, is the number of people we've seen on the Royal Mile packing that historic high street in order to catch a glimpse of the late Queen's coffin.
And here we can see the King working his way through the lines of dignitaries who are inside the Parliament. And he's perhaps stopping to chat for a little bit longer than maybe his staff might have chosen.
It's a reasonably slow progress, and I have witnessed before his wife, the now Queen Consort, can often be seen waiting for him to catch up with her at the end of a line, because he is often drawn to lengthy conversations, shall I put it diplomatically, with people he is meeting. So it would not be the first time that some people are waiting for the King to finish his conversations. But I mean, we should remind ourselves, however, on that lighter note, that this is, for him, a very sombre day, very significant. This is at the Scottish Parliament, but also just think about what he went through this afternoon, walking behind his mother's coffin along the Royal Mile into the historic St Giles Cathedral, and then the vigil that he will perform in the coming minutes when he returns to the cathedral where his mother's coffin is lying at rest.
It is impossible, really, is it, to overstate the enormity of the change that his life will have gone through in the last few days, from being heir to the throne for many decades to now being the king, and all that entails for him and his staff. The whole machinery has to shift up several gears, doesn't it?
Yes, but I think a lot of people have been surprised with the sort of smoothness of the transition. Clearly, he became king at the moment of his mother's death, but also, his staff are now members of the King's household. We were talking earlier about the Queen's bodyguard for Scotland, now called the King's bodyguard of Scotland. Even Clarence House's Twitter feed has been closed down over the last 24 hours because clearly the social media account for the King is now coming from Buckingham Palace. They might seem like minor changes, but it's an indication of all the huge infrastructure and the huge changes that have happened in that second between the reign passing from Queen Elizabeth II to King Charles III.
It's interesting stuff, isn't it? Well, while we wait for the King to emerge, let's just cross quickly to Neil Connery, who is amongst the crowds inside St Giles, where the late Queen's coffin is lying at rest. Neil, what is the atmosphere like there? What have people been saying to you?
Mary, as you say, we've just come from inside St Giles Cathedral, and I have to say it was a very powerful and moving experience for everyone who is making their way in that queue, filing past the Queen's coffin. It is draped in the Royal Standard of Scotland with the Scottish crown on top of that. It was a very peaceful and calm atmosphere inside, the evening sun streaming through the famous stained glass windows of St Giles, some of them dating back to the early 1800s, and while we were making our way around we had to stop as the Royal Company of Archers were changing watch, and they did that with incredible dignity and precision. It was very emotional, the atmosphere inside. There was one lady behind me in tears when she stopped next to the Queen's coffin. She had to be supported by a family member. And speaking with people in the queue throughout the day, they've been telling me they felt after that shock on Thursday they had to come here, they had to be here to show their gratitude for a life of incredible service.
Yeah. All right, Neil Connery, thank you for the moment. And just to bring you back in, Chris Shipp, this is, I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful camera shot, isn't it, with the magnificent picture of the coffin in the middle there, draped in the Royal Standard of Scotland, and the crown of Scotland upon it, together with that wreath of white flowers, which you were telling us about earlier.
Yes, the crown of Scotland, made for James V, made of Scottish gold, sits atop that coffin and was brought to St Giles's Cathedral earlier today under a police escort. And it's probably worth pausing to look at that image for a few moments as people are actually filing past the coffin on either side, and you can see in all four corners there the Royal Company of Archers, the King's bodyguard in Scotland. It might be worth just pausing and just taking in that scene for a few moments.
And what is interesting, we know that there are huge crowds outside. It's a very slow speed of people moving through. It doesn't seem to be that it's a constant line by any means. people are coming nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that, Mary, is because what we're looking at now is a change in the watch.
Yes.
Each watch, the period of watch is actually 6 hours, but that 6-hour watch is divided into 20-minute vigils. So each member of the Royal Company of Archers spends 20 minutes standing there, and we were discussing earlier, weren't we, how there is a spare just in case any member of that vigil needs to be changed. But you can see, I suspect while when the change takes place in those 20-minute periods, I suspect that members of the public are held back momentarily. Yes. And of course we've got a significant change on the way when members of the royal family take their positions in those places in all four corners of the Queen's coffin.
There we see the previous 4 from the vigil walking away, and the next 4 taking over for the next 20 minutes, standing with heads bowed, and so the coffin is never left unattended.
No, the coffin will have a watch on it through the night, and remember, it will rest here in that position in St Giles's Cathedral until 5 o'clock tomorrow evening, when the coffin will then be carried into a hearse for a move to Edinburgh Airport and then a flight to London.
Okay, well, at the moment Edinburgh is the focus of the nation's mourning, but let's take a look at what will happen over the next few days. Tomorrow the King and Queen Consort will fly to Belfast, where they will meet senior politicians and attend a service of prayer and reflection. Meanwhile, the Queen's coffin will be flown to London, where it will rest overnight tomorrow at Buckingham Palace. On Wednesday, her coffin will travel in a procession led by the King from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster. Then there will be a short service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury to begin 4 days of the Queen lying in state. On Friday, moving forward, the King will continue his tour of the UK nations as he heads to Wales. A nationwide minute silence will be observed on Sunday night at 8 o'clock. That was announced just today. And then on Monday, a state funeral for the Queen will take place at Westminster Abbey. Well, Downing Street today announced that there will be a national minute silence, as I just said, at 8 p.m. on Sunday night, on the eve of that funeral in London. And already people are beginning to queue in the capital for the lying in state, which doesn't even start for another 48 hours. No one really knows how many people will try to take part, but it's expected even to far exceed the 200,000 people who attended the Queen Mother's lying in state in 2002. Rachel Younger reports.
It's just past noon when the first person arrives to pay their last respects. Staff are just beginning to set up a queue, so with no obvious starting point, Vanessa's starting it here at Lambeth Bridge.
I just want to make sure that I get the chance to pay the last respect in Westminster Hall when she's going to be lying in state. I learned that it's going to be a long queue, so I was inquiring everyone where it's going to be starting, so found out it's here, so I thought I would start.
By mid-afternoon, Vanessa has company. After leaving home at 3 a.m, Anne's arrived by train from Cardiff, ready to wait for as long as it takes.
They've got plenty of security, you know, and as you say, if you are hungry, I think young people today ring Deliveroo. So I have to, perhaps somebody can show me how to do that. But I have got some homemade sandwiches and Welsh cakes.
Can you tell Anne's done this before? 2 decades ago for the Queen Mother.
The scene on London's Lambeth Bridge this afternoon.
She was among 200,000 mourners, but it was the Queen's father who was the last sovereign to lie in state.
The opportunity was given for the people to pay tribute.
7 decades on, they're preparing for up to 1 million mourners, though no one really knows how many might come. What is confirmed is that the Queen's lying in state will begin at 5 p.m. on Wednesday. Open 24 hours a day until it ends at 6:30 a.m. on Monday. There will be 1,500 soldiers on standby to help manage the huge crowds expected. People passing through airport-style security with a small bag permitted, but no photography of any kind. At Green Park, the piles of flowers continue to grow, but the hope of paying their respects in person is fading for many of the Queen's generation.
I came for the lying in state of the Queen Mother, and that was very moving, and that was a 4-hour queue, I think. You know, you got to know friends, exchange Christmas cards, everything, but I really couldn't cope with this.
And what would it mean to you if arrangements were put in place so the Queen's generation could see
I'd be there.
We're going to miss out on a once-in-our-lifetime opportunity.
And I can tell that that's something that really pains you.
It does. And we'd like to pay our respects.
So they pay their tributes here, knowing that those who want to mourn the most resilient of women in person will need plenty of stamina themselves. Rachel Younger, ITV News, London.
Well, Ben Chapman is on London's South Bank, where those queues are expected to increase over the coming hours and indeed days. Ben, what is the government saying about queuing in terms of practical advice?
Well, there may be just a few people who are committed enough to spend 2 nights out here waiting as it stands at the moment, but the government's advice is very clear. They are anticipating that people will have to wait in queues for many, many hours, potentially overnight, such as the sheer volume of mourners who are expected here. And so today we've watched as some practical preparations have been put into place. Portable loos have been brought in. We expect a wristband system to be introduced so people can duck out of that queue to take those comfort breaks. But people are being asked to think really carefully about what clothes they will need to wear, what medication they'll need to bring with them, what food and drink they can consume in the queue before disposing of it at the security check at Westminster Hall. The queue will also be moving, and so people won't be able to sit down, let alone pitch a tent or crawl into a sleeping bag. And people may wish to consider, for instance, whether they want to bring their children here, as keen as they may be, to pay their final respects.
I'm going to interrupt you because we now have the new King coming out of the Scottish Parliament. We have been, thank you for the moment, I may return to you, but we now have King Charles III emerging from the Scottish Parliament behind us and meeting some of the crowd who have been allowed to come close up there. And you can just see him in the middle of the shot there, wearing his kilt, surrounded by security staff and his equerry and so on. And with me is the broadcaster Aisha Hazarika, political commentator. Give us an idea of the significance of the presence of the new King in Scotland here in Edinburgh.
It really cannot be understated, Mary. For many people in Edinburgh, I was actually waiting around the side entrance of the Scottish Parliament when he arrived. The streets were absolutely packed. People had come from all over Scotland, and a lot of people from the north of England, Northumberland, Newcastle, Liverpool as well. And the phrase I heard over and over again was that we feel really lucky that the Queen, however it happened, they sort of feel like the stars aligned in a way, and they knew how much the Queen loved Scotland.
Just hear the King talking to the crowd.
We all need this, sir. We all need them. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Your Majesty, all the very best to you. I'll be thinking of you for the next few days. Yes, I think they would really enjoy it.
Good. I'll try.
And there we have King Charles getting into his car, having met the crowds outside the Scottish Parliament. Very enthusiastic response. Aisha, are you surprised by the warmth of the reception? And there's a big round of applause now as he drives off with the Queen Consort. It couldn't be much warmer, could it?
It's so warm. Now, a lot of the people I spoke today said that, look, they were very much honouring his mother, but there's real affection for him as well. Remember, he has spent time in Scotland. He loves Balmoral as well. He has Dumfries House that he's done a lot of work in. But I think for a lot of people, I spoke to one woman today and she had a nice story. She said, look, my mother and my grandmother spoke about the Queen's coronation. I want to be able to tell my grandchildren about this incredible day in history. And the Queen loved Scotland, and many people feel that today is almost her gift to Scotland because the world's eyes are on Scotland. But of course, the other thing that I've heard from so many people on the Royal Mile today was thank goodness the weather has stayed so nice, because if it had been pelting down with rain, it might have felt quite a different atmosphere here today.
Yes, indeed. What you say about your mother and your the lady you were talking to, mother and grandmother, I mean, I do think it was very much a generational thing. My mum slept out, I remember her telling me, on the eve of the coronation, and for that generation in particular, it was very, very precious, wasn't it, the link with the Queen? But there are lots of young people as well here.
There are, and I think people are aware that today is, you know, the first draft in history, and Edinburgh is a very magical, ancient city, so it's actually very special for Edinburgh to be playing a role in contemporary history being made today. Very interesting that he's made this visit to the Scottish Parliament. Of course, he visited the parliaments in Westminster for the first time today. He addressed politicians from both houses, so it's important for people in Scotland that he was at Holyrood today, the Scottish Parliament. Of course, devolution, there was a referendum here about devolution 30 years ago, and it's important, I think, for him to show that he respects this part of the devolution of this country as well. We saw the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, reading at the ceremony, the service at St Giles Cathedral. So we know that there are these other political questions swirling around right now, but it is important for the new king to come and show deference to this elected, the elected officials here, and of course this very important Parliament here in Scotland as well, just as he did in Westminster today.
We saw some wonderful pictures just then of the Royal Company of Archers, who are the King's bodyguard, are they not, in Scotland, Chris?
Yes, once the Queen's bodyguard, now the King's bodyguard, and it is that same company of archers with a long history with the monarchy in Scotland, who are maintaining that vigil which we're seeing right now of the Queen's coffin inside St Giles Cathedral. I think confirmation, Mary, that whatever happened inside the Scottish Parliament, which, remember, was opened by the King's mother, the late Queen, in 1999, I think whatever has happened in there has put the timetable back a little bit. The King has just driven back into the Palace of Holyrood House. We've said more than once in the past 24 hours, the official seat of monarchy in Scotland, now his monarchy, of course. Flying above it will be the royal standard in Scotland. And then he will make the journey once again with other members of his family back to St Giles's Cathedral for this evening vigil, which we are expecting to happen in the next few minutes, perhaps 20 minutes away now because of the late running timetable.
And Louise Scott is outside St Giles Cathedral. We're looking at the inside with the rather moving picture of the late Queen's coffin there, with the crown of Scotland on top of it, draped in the Royal Standard of Scotland. And as I say, Louise Scott is outside with some of the people who are waiting to come in and pay their respects. Louise.
Yes, well, the queue was stopped for a little while. We can now actually see it snaking round. It was trickling in earlier, taking time to go through that airport-style security, but they're now seen to be stopped in waves. I'm not sure if this is ahead of King Charles and his siblings coming for the vigil, which is often a private moment for the family to pay their last time with the Queen's coffin here in Scotland. But there seems to be more coming through, all ages. We've seen little children holding their parents' hand walking along. We've seen people aided by mobility sticks or wheelchairs, just really taking this moment to be able to pay their respects to the Queen and say goodbye as she is in Scotland. And we also have people lining the street behind me here. It's really full again, waiting for a chance to to see King Charles. When he had left the service earlier in the day, there was cheers of God Save the King. There was people clapping, waving. I think many here hoping that he might come past and shake some hands like he has further down at Holyrood. But nevertheless, despite the sun going down here and there being a bit more of a chill in the air, many staying out just for that opportunity.
Louise Scott, thank you. And we can see the steady stream of people coming through now. Aisha, to return to you for the moment, what strikes me about this is it's an extraordinary mixture, isn't it? It's ancient, it's modern, it's the connection between the state and the religious faith of the royal family that all of this is based in.
And I think that's why St Giles Cathedral is such an important location for bringing together this, as you say, so much history there as well. I mean, that's where there was fiery speeches made by John Knox, you know, back in the day. But it's a place which is traditionally, it was built to sort of be like Westminster Abbey in Edinburgh. And it has traditionally brought together the political, the monarch, the state, and of course faith. And faith was incredibly important to the Queen. But I think what's been very powerful are the optics that we've seen from the cathedral. The first time seeing the late Queen's coffin as she lays at rest, and there was a very powerful moment when the Crown of Scotland was put there. And I think again that will mean so much to the people of Scotland, that it's at this incredible moment in history. It is Edinburgh which is centre stage right now.
Of course, for those in Scotland, she was not Elizabeth II, was she? She was Queen Elizabeth.
She was, and I think for many people in Scotland as well, particularly people who lived around her estate in Balmoral, they didn't just see her as the monarch, you know, they didn't just see her as the Queen, they saw her as part of this Highland community, they saw her as a neighbour and a friend. She didn't seem distant. And again, you know, as we've alluded to, there's lots of, you know, different views going around about the constitutional question, but I thought the SNP leader Ian Blackford summed it up beautifully in Westminster when he said, for many Scots, she was always seen as Elizabeth, Queen of Scots.
Yes, that's a rather wonderful sentiment, isn't it? I think we can go to Vigil now, who's in amongst the crowds down in the meadows in the centre of Edinburgh. What's happening where you are, Vigil?
Mary, thousands of people, we're being told, are waiting patiently in line for their chance to file past the Queen's coffin. Many have been here for several hours already, and this is only really the official start of the queue. It snakes way past right to the bottom of this hill that we are on, and in front of them they have at least a mile and a half to go, and snaking through the streets and the centre of Edinburgh. It is good atmosphere here, but people are obviously desperate, really wanting to pay their respects. The doors of St Giles Cathedral will be open throughout the night and into tomorrow afternoon, and so many people here are facing a pretty long wait before they get to that front. And once they get inside the cathedral, they will only really have a precious few seconds to pay their respects before they will be asked to move on. But for so many people who I've spoken to here say that this is such a significant moment that they want to be part of, and that they don't want to miss out, that they are willing to wait for as long as is necessary in order to have those precious few seconds to pay their respects.
Vigil down there alongside the queue, which may be running for many hours to come. Thank you for the time being. Now, we have seen and heard today the very special relationship the Queen had with Scotland. It is a country she loved, somewhere she felt truly at home. It also had a deep connection with the new king, as our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith now explains.
The Queen's love for Scotland was born on childhood trips to Balmoral and endured her whole life. While we don't choose our perfect time or place of passing, it is in this nation that the Queen is said to have felt uniquely at ease, at peace among the people.
Well, I suppose Balmoral is a place one looks forward to very much, as the Summer goes on.
As a young queen, she could have sailed the Royal Yacht Britannia anywhere in the world, but her holidays usually began in the Hebrides.
Piper Donald MacDonald plays the Queen ashore.
Exploring lesser-known Scottish beaches, having her children brave the chilly seas. Scots have had a rare view of this queen, relaxed in the outdoors, casually dressed, telling jokes at the family barbecue.
The Queen has always adored Scotland, always spent a long time at Balmoral and always harked back to Queen Victoria's enthusiasm for Scotland. All the tartan, the castles and all the rest of it, you know, the fact that the royals wear kilts endlessly when they're in Scotland is part of them saying to the people of Scotland, look, we belong to you too. And that's really important because there is a different relationship between monarchy and people in Scotland.
Nowhere has this distinct relationship been more apparent than at the Braemar gathering. Year after year we have seen genuine enjoyment and affection joining the community for their Highland Games. Now at this place where the Queen smiled so often, a lone piper's lament. These are the local people who knew the Queen, holding their own private ceremony, away from palaces and the queuing public. They retire her chair and lay out the tartan blanket and programme from her last games.
She was just a very, very pleasant person who didn't come here to change things but came here to enjoy things that were here.
And we have Highland Games now in America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and it's all thanks to the attendance of the royal family here at the Braemar gathering that we are now recognised as the home of the World Games, Highland Games.
So they came here and they didn't just observe Scottish culture, they took part and then championed it internationally.
That's correct, yes.
The Queen also attended Crathy Kirk here and prayed alongside the local congregation. That's where she first heard Paul play his fiddle, then invited him to play for her in Balmoral. He played the same tune here on Saturday at a private service for the royals, an emotional moment just for her children and grandchildren. He sees the nation now mourn a monarch, but around here they are remembering their neighbour.
What a lot of folk probably wouldn't see, because you just see that side of the family, is that they held regular Gillies balls. The Queen was up for about 50% of the dances, and the very first dance she was up and she was, come on, get up. And you could see the family there, just genuine belly laughing, having a proper good time. And I mean, that wouldn't be so much just the local aristocracy, but you would have found, like, the local butcher would be there.
The new king inherits a connection with Scotland that runs deep, but he knows this nation well. He is the first British monarch to have gone to school rather than be educated at home, and it was at Gordonston near Elgin that he attended for 6 years.
So this is actually what was King Charles's room. And he was house captain. This is where he'd have slept and worked and socialised with his friends, and this is actually his desk.
While here, the young king played the part of Macbeth in the Scottish play. He also wrote about tough times here at boarding school, though later said the Gordonston education helped shape the man we see today.
Yes, we see so much of the Gordonston ethos being reflected in our monarch. We also see so much of Scotland reflected in our new monarch. We do think of the royal family as the Scottish royal family, and this connection with the sea and his career in the Navy, and with the beautiful countryside around here, and his commitment to conservation, his patronage of the arts.
That passion for conservation led to him stepping in to save Dumfries House in Ayrshire from being sold off, along with its prized Chippendale collection.
If you can provide a catalyst for that regeneration, using a house like this and its associated policies and everything else, then perhaps you could bring something back to life or give new hope and inspiration.
While people around here have embraced the royals as neighbours, it would be wrong to portray that as a universal affinity in Scotland. Cities like Glasgow and Dundee, far from these rolling hills, have become notably cooler on flag waving and street parties. The Queen's former piper has seen the changes and understands the challenges facing the new king.
I think King Charles III has lots to offer. I think the royal family, whether people like it or not, are completely interwoven into the fabric of society. They're part of who we are.
As people of Scotland pay respect to the Queen before she leaves this land she so treasured one final time, we can see the legacy she leaves behind. A special relationship with Scotland, but also a complicated one. Now it is the King who inherits that great responsibility for maintaining this unique bond. Peter Smith, ITV News, Royal Deeside.
Well, Aisha Hazarika is still with us, as is, of course, Royal Editor Chris Shipp. I'm reminded again, what a beautiful country Scotland is, my goodness.
It's absolutely gorgeous, and you can really see why the Queen treasured Scotland so much, and it does feel like her final parting gift is to allow the world to see why she fell in love with this country, right from the journey yesterday from Balmoral through Aberdeenshire down to Edinburgh. This beautiful route, you know, Scotland was gleaming in the sunshine, this gorgeous autumnal sunshine. Today the same is true of Edinburgh. I mean, I've just been seeing people wandering around, just looking around the city going, you could not have a better backdrop for this procession, and the fact that all the world's media is here today. People actually feel like it's a very, very special time for the country and for the city right now, and it really has helped that the gods of the weather has smiled down on us today.
Absolutely. I don't think the Queen would have been appalled had it rained, so it was never going to dare to do that. But she was, of course, half Scottish, wasn't she? The Queen Mother lived at Glamis Castle, and the Bowes-Lyons were Scottish. So there is a blood link very much with Scotland for the royal family.
There's such a strong blood link, and also, you know, England and Scotland are so bound in their history, at times a very, very difficult history till we get to the Act of Union. And of course, there are big questions swirling around right now. But what is undeniable, particularly because of the choreography of what's happened since Thursday and the fact that the Queen did die in her beloved Balmoral, is the closeness, the connection that England and Scotland has is absolutely undeniable. And I think the other thing that people have said is there's one thing to have a kind of constitutional link and an old-time historical link. There was a genuine love and a genuine affection showed by the Queen to Scotland. You can't fake that. The fact that she chose to spend a huge amount of her summer every year in Balmoral, and she didn't stay distant from the sort of local community. She was very much amongst people. And I think that's why people feel that the bond was an authentic bond. It wasn't a manufactured bond. It wasn't a sort of, you know, a kind of transactional bond. It wasn't sort of a bond because of political manoeuvres. It was a bond, you know, fostered through a lot of love and time.
And people, Mary, have been telling me and reminding me actually that the Queen used to spend a quarter of her year in Scotland every year, and I think that meant a lot to them, that this wasn't a London-centric Queen or a Windsor-centric Queen, as perhaps she was forced to do in her later years, but she used to choose to spend a quarter of her year in this part of the United Kingdom. And as we look at those live images from the east nave of St Giles's Cathedral, where the Queen lies at rest for the next 24 hours or so. An archer sentry in each corner, an archer duty officer just to the left of the screen there, as well as you were referring to earlier, the archer in waiting should he need to be called upon. And there will be a permanent vigil in those four corners of the Queen's coffin for the next 22 hours or so. And what we're waiting for this evening is for those positions, those sentry positions, to be taken up by members of the royal family, including the King himself.
The main idea being that the Queen's coffin is never left unattended. So every 20 minutes the watch changes and another 4 of those members of the Royal Company of Archers comes in, and as you say, the spare on the side standing with the adjutant.
Yes, and actually ever since it arrived at the Palace of Holyrood House last night after that 6-hour journey from Balmoral, it has not been unattended. It's had a vigil, kept watch over that coffin throughout. It was resting in the throne room last night, but she has now left the Palace of Holyrood House for the last time, and this will be her the last magnificent building in which she will rest before the coffin makes its next journey. It's quite a long process. We've already been told about the state funeral, which will happen on Monday the 19th. We've been that's a public holiday as well in all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. We've been told that there will be a minute's silence on the day before that at 8 p.m.
on the Sunday.
And whilst the crowds will continue to file past this coffin for the next 24 hours here in Edinburgh, the next big moment, of course, will be in London when she leaves Buckingham Palace for the last time, and a similar procession will take place in London from Buckingham Palace along those historic streets, the Mall and Horse Guards, to the Great Hall inside the Palace of Westminster, where she will be lying in state for the next 4 or 5 days after Wednesday.
And the journey eventually ends at Windsor.
Yes, the journey that we've been talking about, or what the King himself referred to as his mother's last great journey, will end with a committal in Windsor. And interestingly, it is a corner of St George's Chapel in Windsor, which is called the George VI Memorial Chapel. It's where her late mother, the Queen Mother, is. It's where her late father, the King, is. And that's where the Queen will eventually be laid to rest in the committal service, which will happen after the funeral on Monday.
Alongside, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh as well.
Eventually, that is the plan, yes.
Yeah. OK, for the moment. Chris and Aisha, thank you. Well, today we saw the Queen's children and we process behind the coffin up the Royal Mile. Her grandchildren, Princes Harry and William, were not in that procession, but we have today had a first public statement paying tribute to the Queen from Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. He and the new Prince of Wales remain in Windsor, where of course we saw them on Saturday together for the first time in quite a while with their wives. And Martha Fairley is there for us now. Martha, still huge crowds in Windsor.
Yes, it's quieter here in Windsor today than over the weekend, but as well as private deliveries of flowers we've seen arriving at the castle, there have been many thousands more bunches of flowers brought by members of the public who have come to spend a moment of reflection at the top of the Long Walk. And that is, of course, where on Saturday, as you said, we saw the new Prince and Princess of Wales, along with Harry and Meghan, making their unexpected walkabout and taking time to look at those flowers and speak to the public. Today we heard from the Duke of Sussex, who issued a very personal tribute to his grandmother, which read, "Granny, while this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful for all of our first meetings. From my earliest childhood memories with you, to meeting you for the first time as my Commander-in-Chief, to the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved great-grandchildren. I cherish these times shared with you and the many other special moments in between. You are already sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over. And as it comes to first meetings, we now honour my father on his new role as King Charles III." Well, meanwhile, preparations are underway here at Windsor for the Queen's final journey back to Windsor after her funeral next Monday, when the state hearse will travel along the Long Walk back to the castle for the committal service at St George's Chapel.
Martha Fairley in Windsor, thank you. And we're now looking at live pictures going from Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, from the Palace of Holyrood to St Giles Cathedral. In the back of that car, the new King, and he is going to be arriving shortly in the next couple of minutes to attend.
With him, Mary, looking in the back of the car as he's retracing that journey that he made on foot earlier at a very slow pace following the late Queen's coffin. A much faster move along the Royal Mile now, of course. You'll probably find as he makes his way up towards the High Street and then Lawn Market at the very top there, that's where the crowds are at the moment, or certainly was when I was there a short while ago. And there we go, you can see it's quite a, the Royal Mile naturally being about a mile long, and it's got some way to go. But the Police Scotland are securing the route, and as he gets closer to St Giles's Cathedral, that's where you'll see the crowds who have gathered in the last couple of hours since the service of remembrance this afternoon.
And just if anyone is joining us, explain what's going to be happening at St Giles Cathedral. when he arrives.
If people are just joining us, the Queen's coffin is lying at rest in St Giles Cathedral, in the east nave of the cathedral, and the plan at the moment is for the King and members of the royal family, and by that we think his siblings, although I do note, let's have another look inside that car, is the Queen consort. So we await to see what exactly they plan to do. We were expecting the King, Princess Anne, his sister, along with Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, to maintain the vigil at their mother's coffin this evening. We've explained the timetable has been slightly elongated. The visit to the Scottish Parliament just opposite the Palace of Holyrood House took a little longer than expected. But here we go, let's have a listen to the crowds as the King and the Queen consorts return to St Giles Cathedral.
And there we are, the King arriving again at St Giles Cathedral. Chris.
Returning to the west steps, and they're going through the west door as his mother's coffin did a little earlier. And in fact, Mary, I was wondering why it appeared when we were watching a few moments ago there were no members of the public filing past the coffin. Well, there's your answer. There's the King with his sister, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York as well. And I think behind that's Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex and Forfar, as he's known in Scotland. The King's private secretary also there, a chap called Clive Alderton. And there's the Queen consort and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex and Forfar. Returning to the cathedral, they were all out this afternoon for the service for the late Queen.
And escorted again by the Royal Company of Archers.
And they're maintaining that vigil, as you can see, heads bowed in all four corners of the coffin, which rests in the east nave. You can see there the King has now lined up with his sister and his two brothers, and they are about to replace the Royal Company of Archers for this vigil.
May she rest in peace. May light perpetual shine upon her. God bless the Queen. God save the Queen.
And here you see the King leading his three siblings out of St Giles Cathedral. They have just completed a little under 10 minutes of vigil at the four corners of their mother's coffin, standing alongside the Royal Company of Archers, who are smiles greeting the applause as the King and Queen Consort emerged from St Giles, and a rather beautiful shot of it floodlit there, really magnificent, as was the sight, Chris Ship, of the four siblings together around their mother's coffin.
Quite another remarkable image on a week of remarkable images, as St Giles Cathedral really does play centre stage in the events today. Let's have a listen to the crowd.
Waving from the car at the crowd, and he's returning to the Palace of Holyrood House now.
That's right, yes, where he will rest for the night with the other members of the royal family. We're looking at the King's car there. The Queen Consort was also with him. She did not take part in the vigil. That was only for the Queen's children. But we saw the King with the Princess Royal, with the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex and Forfar. But the Queen Consort was at St Giles Cathedral, and arrangements were made for her to witness the vigil from inside the cathedral. And also Sophie was there too, the Countess of Wessex and Forfar, Prince Edward's wife. And I think if you remember the public who had queued up to file past the coffin in the East Nave, it would have come as quite a surprise to see the four children of the late Queen all standing, keeping vigil at the coffin just as you filed past. That would have been quite a remarkable moment if you were inside the cathedral.
It certainly would, and unexpected, I think, as far as the crowds were concerned. Penny Juno, royal biographer, is with me. Your thoughts, Penny?
Well,
I have to say I found that intensely moving. The grief etched on those children's faces. You know, there we've seen Princess Anne, who travelled in the car, of course, behind the Queen's body, all the way from Balmoral down to Edinburgh, with her husband. But, you know, she's a very strong woman, very stoical, but her face was heartbreaking. And of course Prince Charles, you know, Prince Charles, the King, who has always been a very emotional man. He seemed to have, while he was greeting the crowds, put that to one side and seemed to be, you know, dealing with the work that he had to do and the
How difficult a moment must this have been to take up that position next to one of the Royal Company of Archers who were providing the sentry positions there on the four corners of the coffin. Such an intense moment for all four of the Queen's children.
And the King, his head bowed, deep in thought. The loss of their mother.
Yes, the loss of their mother. And you know, I wonder, one minute on Tuesday she had an audience with the new Prime Minister. Who knows what happened between Wednesday and Thursday when we heard that she'd died. But that must have been something pretty sudden. And one wonders, did they have a chance to say what they wanted to say to her before she died? Yes, she was very old, and you know, but did they on that day manage to? Because you don't, do you? You know, you think, oh, I'll tell them, you know, I've got something to do. I'll make that phone call. I'll tell them that I love them, or thank them for your life, or whatever it be.
We will never know what happened in those final few hours, will we, Chris? I mean, you speak to the palace regularly, but that will remain private.
As it should, actually, just that in the same way that in life they never gave us a running commentary on the Queen's medical condition. In death, all we are to know was that her doctor pronounced her gravely ill and she passed away at some point on Thursday. And we know that members of the family did fly to Balmoral to try and see her. We don't know which members of the family managed to get there in time, but the now King, then of course Prince Charles and Princess Anne were in Scotland, so it's entirely possible they did manage to make the journey to Balmoral in time, but we will of course never know.
And what we're looking at here, for anyone who is just switching on now, is the four royal siblings, led by the King, in Vigil around their mother's coffin. And the coffin will not be alone until it leaves. Will not be alone at all. It will be attended at all times.
They've played their part, they've mounted their vigil this evening, but the vigil will continue through the night and through tomorrow as members of the public continue to file past.
And the King and the Queen Consort leaving St Giles Cathedral then just a few minutes ago to a huge round of applause and great warmth. Final word from you, Penny.
I think that those people who are queuing for the mile are going to have a very cold night.
I think you're quite right.
Yeah, I think, you know, looking once again at the wonderful setting that Edinburgh is providing for these sequence of events, I think it really is quite fitting.
Indeed, it is, and that brings to a close our special programme on another key moment in the Queen's final journey. This afternoon, in a solemn ceremony, her coffin was brought slowly along Edinburgh's Royal Mile. The procession, led by the King, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and Princes Andrew and Edward. Tens of thousands of people lined the route as the late Queen was taken to St Giles Cathedral. Inside, there was a service of celebration, remembrance, attended by senior politicians, including the Prime Minister and Scotland's First Minister. They paid tribute to Her Majesty and celebrated her deep connections to a country she loved and where she, of course, died. A short time ago, the Queen's 4 children held a special vigil inside St Giles. In silence, they stood watch over their darling mother. And that is all from us. Julie will have the latest on events here and across the world in News at 10. But from now, from all the team and me in Edinburgh, bye-bye.
Good evening to you. We've got clearer skies developing as we head through the rest of this evening and tonight. Sunshine returns to many locations tomorrow ahead of rain moving into southern counties as the afternoon wears on. We've got a deep area of low pressure extending through the western side of Europe and drawing in muggy and mild air across southern counties in the next 24 to 48 hours. Here, outbreaks of rain to come. A huge area of high pressure extending from the mid-Atlantic for the rest of us, and here a little drier, a little clearer if temperatures a little lower. As for the next few hours, rain pulling away into the near North Sea and then generally drier conditions for a time tonight. Clearer skies for Scotland, much of Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland, parts of North Wales, and here dipping temperatures as we go into the small hours.